I never thought my own father and aunts would throw my grandmother away like garbage just to get their hands on her money faster. What I'm about to tell you is a story that will make your blood boil, but stick with me because the ending is absolutely worth it. My name is Emma Patterson. I'm 25 years old, and this is the story of how my family betrayed the most wonderful woman I've ever known, my grandmother Rose, and how she served them the most devastating revenge they never saw coming. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and let me know where you're listening from in the comments. 8 months before everything went down, I was a junior in college, broke as most students are, but rich in one thing that mattered most to me, my relationship with my grandmother. Rose Patterson was 78 years old, a retired elementary school teacher, who had raised 3 children in the most beautiful Victorian house you've ever seen. This house was her pride and joy, worth about $800,000, sitting on 2 acres with gardens she'd cultivated for 40 years. But more than the house, Grandma Rose was pure gold, the kind of woman who remembered every birthday, who made cookies from scratch just because, and who would drop everything to help anyone in need. My father David, his older sister Margaret, and younger sister Susan had always seemed like decent people to me. Sure, they were busy with their careers. Dad was a corporate lawyer, Aunt Margaret sold real estate, and Aunt Susan was constantly juggling her kids' activities, but I never imagined they could be so cold-hearted. Everything changed the day Grandma Rose had what I can only call a minor stumble. She was watering her plants on the front porch when she missed a step and scraped her knee. That's it, a scraped knee. But somehow, this tiny incident became the excuse my family needed to turn my grandmother's world upside down. I'll never forget walking into that family meeting. I was home for spring break, and Dad had called everyone together at Grandma's house to discuss her safety. The moment I walked into her living room, I could feel the tension. Grandma Rose sat in her favorite armchair looking confused and small, while my 3 relatives circled her like vultures. Margaret, always the ringleader, was in full real estate agent mode. "Mom, you can't live alone anymore," she declared with that fake concerned voice she used with difficult clients. "What if something serious happens? What if you fall and can't get up?" I watched my grandmother's face crumple. "Margaret, honey, I've lived in this house for 40 years. I raised you children here. This is my home." But Margaret pressed on, completely ignoring the pain in her mother's voice. "Mom, be realistic. You're almost 80. Emma can't watch you 24/7, she has school, her own life to live." That's when my father jumped in, and I felt sick hearing his lawyer voice, the one he used to intimidate people in court. "Mom, we're trying to be reasonable here. We've looked into several facilities that could give you the round-the-clock care you need." The way he said facilities made them sound like prisons. And when they started showing her the brochures, my heart broke. These weren't the nice assisted living communities with beautiful gardens and activities. These were the bare minimum places, the ones that looked more like hospitals than homes. Grandma Rose picked up one brochure with shaking hands. "What about Sunset Manor? The nice one by the lake where Mrs. Henderson went? She seemed so happy there." I'll never forget the look Margaret gave her, pure annoyance, like Grandma Rose was a child asking for something unreasonable. "Mom, that place costs $8,000 a month. Shady Oaks is only $2,400. We have to be practical about this." Practical. That word made me want to scream. Practical for who? Certainly not for the woman who had sacrificed everything for her children. Aunt Susan, who had been quiet until then, finally spoke up, but only to echo Margaret like she always did. "Margaret's right, Mom. We have to think about the long-term costs." I wanted to say something, anything, but I was just the granddaughter, just a college kid with no money and no power. So I watched helplessly as they slowly wore down the strongest woman I knew. Over the next few weeks, the pressure intensified. Margaret started bringing real estate agents to just get an idea of what the house was worth. Dad showed up with legal documents that he claimed were for her protection, but looked more like ways to give him power over her finances. Susan guilt her with daily phone calls about how worried they all were, how they couldn't sleep at night thinking about her living alone. And slowly, heartbreakingly, I watched my grandmother begin to break. The woman who had taught hundreds of children, who had raised 3 kids as a single mother after Grandpa died, who had always been the rock of our family, started saying things like, maybe you're all right. Maybe I am being selfish keeping this big house. I tried to fight back. Dad, Grandma doesn't want to leave her house. Can't you see how much this is hurting her? But he dismissed me with that patronizing voice parents use on children. Emma, the adults are talking here. You don't understand the financial realities we're dealing with. Financial realities. Like my grandmother was just a burden on their budgets instead of the woman who had given them everything. The worst part was watching Grandma Rose make excuses for them. They're just worried about me, sweetheart, she'd tell me when I'd find her crying in her kitchen. They work so hard, and I don't want to be a burden on them. A burden. This woman who had worked 2 jobs to put them through college, who had never asked them for anything, thought she was a burden. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I arrived to find Grandma Rose sitting at her kitchen table with papers spread out in front of her, tears streaming down her face. Margaret stood over her, pointing to signature lines. Just sign here, Mom. We're doing this because we love you. Love. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but I was too heartbroken to find anything funny. As Grandma Rose signed those papers with shaking hands, effectively giving up her home and her independence, she looked up at me with the saddest expression I'd ever seen. But then, something strange happened. She leaned close to me and whispered something that I wouldn't understand until months later. Don't worry, sweetheart. Sometimes the mouse has to let the cats think they've won. Then she reached for her phone and made a call that would change everything. Hello, Patricia. It's time. Yes, I'm ready to proceed. 2 weeks later, I helped my grandmother pack her entire life into 3 suitcases. Watching her fold the clothes she'd worn to teach countless children, seeing her carefully wrap the photos of family members who clearly didn't deserve her love, it was torture. But nothing prepared me for the absolute horror of Shady Oaks Nursing Home. The moment we walked through those doors, I wanted to grab Grandma Rose and run. The smell hit you first. That awful combination of disinfectant trying to mask something much worse. The paint was peeling off the walls, there were water stains on the ceiling, and the few staff members we saw looked overworked and exhausted. This wasn't a home, it was a warehouse for forgotten people. Grandma Rose's room was barely larger than my college dorm, and she had to share it with a stranger, Mrs. Garcia, who spent most of her time staring blankly at a television that played soap operas at ear-splitting volume. The furniture was old and mismatched, the window looked out onto a parking lot, and there wasn't even space for her favorite reading chair. But you know what broke my heart the most? My grandmother looked at this depressing little space and said, "It's not so bad, Emma. I'll make friends here. Maybe I can help some of the other residents." Even in this awful place, she was thinking about helping others. The first month was a nightmare. I visited every few days, and each time Grandma Rose looked smaller, more defeated. The food was terrible. Overcooked vegetables and mystery meat that looked like it came from a can. The activities were pathetic. Bingo once a week and a television in the common room that nobody could hear properly. Worst of all, the staff was so understaffed that residents were left sitting in their own mess for hours. Meanwhile, my father and aunts were living their best lives. Dad visited exactly twice in the first 3 months, staying for maybe 20 minutes each time, and taking phone calls the entire time he was there. During one visit, I watched him pace around the lobby talking about some merger while Grandma Rose sat alone in her room waiting for him. Margaret showed up once in the first month, complained about how depressing the place smelled, and left after 15 minutes claiming she had to show a house. She spent more time picking out her lunch than visiting her own mother. And Susan? She sent greeting cards. Actual greeting cards instead of visiting. When I confronted her about it, she had the nerve to say, "It's just so sad there, Emma. Mom understands that it's hard for me to see her like that." Hard for her? What about how hard it was for Grandma Rose? I was furious, but I was also just a broke college student. I couldn't afford to move her somewhere better, couldn't hire private care, couldn't do anything except watch the most important person in my life fade away while her own children acted like she'd already died. The worst part was listening to my family justify their neglect. At a cousin's birthday party, I heard Margaret telling people mom's getting professional care now. It's actually better for her. She has nurses around the clock. Professional care? The nurses were so overwhelmed they couldn't even remember my grandmother's name half the time. Dad told his golf buddies, we made the responsible choice putting mom in assisted living. She's safer there. Responsible? They'd chosen the cheapest place they could find and abandoned her there. Susan convinced herself everything was fine by avoiding reality completely. When I call mom, she sounds okay. The staff says she's adjusting well. Of course she sounded okay on the phone. What was she supposed to say? That she was miserable and felt abandoned by her own children? 3 months in, something changed in my grandmother. I arrived one Thursday afternoon to find her sitting by her window, staring out at the parking lot with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't sadness anymore, it was something harder, colder. Grandma, are you okay? She turned to me with eyes that looked ancient. Emma, do you know what I heard today? I heard 2 of the nurses talking about me. They said poor Rose. Her family dumped her here in the cheapest place they could find. Those kids are just waiting for her to die so they can split up her money. My heart clenched. Grandma, they don't know. But they're right, aren't they? She interrupted. I worked 2 jobs to put David through law school. I helped Margaret with the down payment on her first house. I babysat Susan's children every weekend for 5 years. And this is how they repay me. That same week, a new resident arrived, Mrs. Chen, whose family visited every single day. Her daughter-in-law Patricia brought homemade soup, her grandchildren did homework in the common room, and her son rearranged his work schedule to eat lunch with her twice a week. Watching them together, seeing what real family love looked like, something inside my grandmother finally snapped. The breaking point came when Grandma Rose got pneumonia. I called my father immediately, panicking. Dad, Grandma's in the hospital. She's really sick. I'm in court all week, Emma. Call Margaret. Margaret was showing houses to important clients and couldn't get away. Susan was dealing with a crisis with the kids and couldn't make it either. So I sat alone with my grandmother in that sterile hospital room, watching her struggle to breathe, holding her hand while her own children were too busy to care. When Grandma Rose woke up and looked around the empty room, she asked the question I was dreading. They're not coming, are they? I couldn't lie to her anymore. No, Grandma, they're not coming. She squeezed my hand with surprising strength and said words that still give me chills. I'm done making excuses for them, Emma. I'm done pretending they're good people who are just busy. They threw me away, and now they're going to learn what that feels like. The next day, Patricia Chen, Mrs. Chen's daughter-in-law, and apparently my grandmother's old friend, visited with a briefcase full of legal documents. I watched my grandmother sign papers with a determination I hadn't seen since before the family meeting. The purchase went through yesterday, Rose. Patricia said quietly. We can start renovations immediately. My grandmother smiled for the first time in months. And my children, banned from the property, just like you requested. Perfect. Let's give them 6 more months to prove they don't care. Then we'll show them exactly what consequences look like. I didn't understand what they were planning, but I knew one thing for certain. My father and aunts had no idea what was coming for them. 6 months passed, and my grandmother's transformation was incredible to witness. While my father and aunts continued their shameful neglect, something amazing was happening behind the scenes at Shady Oaks. Construction crews worked around the clock, luxury furnishings arrived weekly, and the staff was completely replaced with certified professionals who actually cared about the residents. Meanwhile, my family remained blissfully unaware of what was brewing. Dad had visited exactly 3 times in 6 months. Margaret managed 2 quick stops, both times complaining about the depressing atmosphere. Susan sent birthday cards and called once a month, always keeping conversations short, because hearing about nursing home life made her too sad. The irony was perfect. They were about to get the shock of their lives, and they had orchestrated it themselves. The day of reckoning came on a Saturday in October. I got a text from Dad. Family meeting at Mom's place today. All 3 of us are going together to check on her. I knew this was it, the day Grandma Rose had been planning for. I arrived at Shady Oaks 30 minutes early and found her in her private suite, looking absolutely radiant. Her hair was professionally styled, she wore a beautiful navy dress I'd never seen before, and her eyes sparkled with anticipation. "Are you ready for this, Grandma?" She smiled like a cat who'd caught 3 mice at once. "Oh, Emma, I've been ready for months." At exactly 2 p.m., I watched from the renovated lobby as my father and aunts walked through the front doors. The looks on their faces were priceless, complete confusion mixed with growing panic. The lobby they remembered as dingy and depressing was now a showcase of marble floors, crystal chandeliers, fresh orchids, and classical music playing softly in the background. Margaret stopped dead in her tracks, her real estate agent brain immediately calculating costs. What the hell happened here? Before anyone could answer, Patricia Chen approached them in an elegant business suit. Every inch the successful entrepreneur she was. "You must be Rose's children. I'm Patricia, the new owner. Mrs. Patterson is expecting you in the Rose Garden suite." David's lawyer instincts kicked in immediately. "New owner? When did ownership change? We weren't notified of any sale." Patricia smiled coolly. 6 months ago. We've made some significant improvements to better serve our residents." As they walked through the hallways, I watched my family's faces grow paler with each step. The place was unrecognizable. Beautiful artwork lined the walls, residents were well-dressed and engaged in activities, professional staff moved efficiently but cheerfully, and everything screamed expensive, high-end care. Susan whispered to Margaret, "This level of care must cost $20,000 a month. How is Mom paying for this?" When they reached Grandma Rose's suite, I was already sitting beside her, both of us trying not to grin. The private room was gorgeous, garden views, antique furniture, fresh flowers, and space for all her belongings from home. My grandmother sat regally in her favorite reading chair, the one my family had sold at a garage sale months earlier. "Hello, children," Grandma Rose said with perfect composure. "How wonderful that you could all visit together. It's been what, 4 months since you were last here, Margaret?" 5 for you, David." Margaret went straight into panic mode about money. "Mom, this place must be costing a fortune. Your pension can't possibly cover this kind of luxury care. Are you going into debt?" My grandmother's response was delivered with surgical precision. "Oh, I'm not paying anything, dear. I own the facility." The silence that followed was deafening. You could literally see their brains struggling to process this information. David recovered first, his voice sharp with disbelief. "That's impossible, Mom. You don't have that kind of money. We handled your finances, remember?" Grandma Rose chuckled, actually chuckled. "You handled the finances you knew about, David. You never asked about your father's life insurance policy, my teacher's retirement investments, or the money I'd been saving for 40 years. Patricia helped me liquidate everything. We're talking about $2.3 million you children never knew existed." I watched Margaret's face cycle through shock, greed, and fury in about 3 seconds. "But Mom, we're your children. That money should be part of our inheritance. You can't just spend our money." Grandma Rose's voice turned ice cold. "My money, Margaret. Money I earned, saved, and invested. Money you assumed you'd get without ever caring whether I lived or died to give it to you." That's when Patricia returned with official-looking documents. "I have something for each of you," she said, handing them trespass notices. Susan started crying immediately. "Mom, we're sorry. We can visit more often. We can do better." My grandmother's response was devastating. In its simplicity, "You had 6 months to prove you cared about me. Emma visited 67 times. Margaret, you came twice. David, 3 times. Susan, once. Those numbers tell me everything I need to know about your love." David's face turned red with anger. "This is emotional manipulation. You're punishing us for trying to keep you safe." "Safe." Grandma Rose stood up, and despite being 78 years old, she commanded that room like the teacher she'd always been. "You put me in a facility where residents sat in their own waste for hours, where the food was inedible, and the staff couldn't remember my name. You call that keeping me safe?" Margaret made one last desperate attempt. "What about Emma? She's just a child. She doesn't understand the responsibility of managing this kind of wealth." My grandmother's final blow was perfect. "Emma will inherit everything, this business, the investments, and a trust fund that will pay for her education and set her up for life. She earned it by being here when I was sick, scared, and abandoned by my own children. Patricia escorted them to the exit while they argued among themselves, their true colors finally on full display. In the parking lot, Margaret screamed at David about his legal advice being worthless. David blamed Margaret for choosing the cheapest facility, and Susan just cried about what people would think when word got around town. As their car disappeared down the street, my grandmother took my hand and walked me to the building's entrance, where workers were installing a beautiful new sign, the Rose Patterson Center for Dignified Senior Living, where every resident matters. Grandma, this is incredible. You're going to help so many families avoid what we went through. She smiled, looking more at peace than I'd seen her in years. That's the plan, sweetheart. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just getting even, it's making sure no one else suffers the same betrayal. 6 years later, the Rose Patterson Center is the most respected senior living facility in our state. Grandma Rose lived there like the queen she deserved to be until she passed peacefully at 84, surrounded by people who truly loved her. My father and aunts never spoke to us again, but honestly, good riddance. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story or opinions in the comments.